Welcome back to the class. We are now in the 9th week, and in this week, we explore the questions of gender studies and the influence of feminism, which had a very very important, significant impact on Indian sociology. So, as you know, the questions related to gender and specifically studies on women have been an integral part of social sciences, and it is often associated with sociology. And the social science or sociological perspectives on gender itself has a history. It has a global history. We will be able to trace the origin and growth of feminism, and you know that has been kind of divided into a couple of the first wave, second wave, and third wave of feminism. So it has a very specific historicity attached to that. And in India as well, this has a very specific history. As in the case of any other perspectives that we discussed earlier, the feminist perspectives or gender studies also have had a very distinct historical trajectory in the Indian scenario. So in this week, we are going to look into the works of some of the very eminent feminist scholars who trace these histories, who kind of problematize the kind of relationship between feminism and sociology, the kind of gender studies and sociology. So it's a very, very interesting set of arguments. And all of them are unanimous in their argument that gender studies or feminist perspective was very much missing in the initial phases of sociological initial phase of the growth of sociology in India. But later, from say 1970s onwards, it was given some kind of an impetus, and yet it actually deserves a lot of critical reflections about how or what is the kind of a relationship between these two disciplines. Are they distinct, and to what extent a kind of a feminist epistemology and feminist critique or feminist reflexivity can actually strengthen the sociological perspectives. And again, as you know, the relationship between these two disciplines have not been very smooth and not been very very easy. They were highly contested. There have been quite a lot of controversies among the scholars about the relevance or centrality of feminist perspectives within social theory. So this actually gives you very interesting insights about the relationship between these two things, these two disciplinary perspectives. So we will be taking up a couple of essays written by some of the eminent gender studies scholars or feminist scholars in sociology. So that is what we are going to do in this week. So the first essay or the essay that we are going to take up in today's class is an introductory chapter written by Sharmila Rege. I hope you have heard her name. It's very important. She was a very very promising sociologist who unfortunately passed away at a much younger age, but she had made some substantial contribution to the sociology of gender, and specifically on the questions of intersectionality, the kind of questions where you look at caste, gender, and and how that kind of intersect in the everyday lives of people. So Sharmila Rege is an important resource person for us, and in today's class we are looking at this essay edited by Sharmila Rege. It's an edited work, Sociology of Gender, The Challenges of Feminist Sociological Knowledge. It's a Sage publication book, and we are going into the specific introductory essay by Sharmila. Okay, it's published in 2003. So let's go to the essay. So this is the the cover page of the book. Its themes in Indian sociology. It's a part of a series that was brought out as this Golden Jubilee celebration of Indian Sociological Society, and several important scholars kind of came together, and they so these are the other books in this series. So a series of scholars like Professor Jairam Ravina Robinson and R.S. Sandhu and P.M. Chako and several others came together, and they edited specific volumes from the articles that were published in the Sociological Bulletin. I hope you know that Sociological Bulletin is the official journal of Indian Sociological Society. So the editors went through all the articles published in Sociological Bulletin till then, and then they selected important articles, and then they brought out specific volumes. So this particular book, edited by Sharmila Rege, is on gender, sociology of gender. It's titled The Sociology of Feminist Sociology, The Challenge of Feminist Sociological Knowledge, edited by her and forwarded by Karuna Chanana, and it was published in 2003. So I'll just have a quick look at the contributors. It has Beatrice Kachauk, Patricia Oberoi, G.N. Ramu, Homa Hutfer, Tipult Nogbri, Leela Dubey, Raj Mohini Sethi, Kevi Kala, Pa Chaplin, Karuna Chanana, and Maitreyi Chaudhary, and others. So we are looking into the first essay, that is the introductory essay, edited by Sharmila Rege. Feminist Challenge to Sociology, Disenchanting Sociology or For Sociology. Okay, that's the title that she has given. Now, I will be scrolling through the essay, and I strongly urge you to read it. This book, it's widely available. You can download it from various sources, or you can buy this book. And then I urge you to go through that clearly. There's no doubt that the re-emergence of feminism and the women's movement in the late 1970s and the early 1970s had a significant impact on the discipline of sociology, okay? Which we know that. So this first part, Sharmila kind of traces the larger transformations in the international scenario of sociology. She looks into how the International Sociological Association, the kind of official or the most important body within at the international realm, began to look at this question, and then they came up with more inclusive projects to bring in gender perspectives and others. So ISA Research Committee 32, a committee on women's studies, had been published in the 1970s in response to the demand by feminists and women sociologists. Despite having taken up issues of regional composition and internationalization in the past, the WIS was not consulted. So she brings up a series of incidents to argue out that the integration of feminism into the mainstream sociology was always half-hearted. Okay? It was always half-hearted. It was always, it did not kind of emerge from a genuine sense of integration or genuine sense of expanding one's own epistemological, frameworks. Rather, it was a half-hearted attempt to bring in with a lot of reluctance. And she says, even after these many years, even after 25 years is a long time for just beginning to persist, and called for a review of the seemingly obvious feminist challenge to the discipline. So that is a fundamental argument that Sharmila Rege puts forward. Sociology as a discipline has been reluctant to integrate completely or to have an open dialogue with the feminist critique or the feminist challenge that posed by this kind of a discipline. And then she gives another example, this Gulbenkian Commission in Researching Social Sciences, another attempt which again, kind of sidelined this question and then went ahead with their own agenda. The agency of feminist critique and scholarship is undermined by rendering their critical reconceptualization as repetitions of earlier criticism. So, yeah. Now, the feminist critique of sociology beyond the stages approach. Now, let's read what she has to say. Across the world, gender politics of second-wave feminism has been intertwined with the introduction of the concept of gender into the professional work of sociologists. The intellectual issues, therefore, cannot be divorced from the political in doing sociology of gender. With the emergence of second-wave feminism and the slogan of personal is political, feminist social scientists began to underline the gaps between their experience as women and their sociological knowledge. And this very important argument, a very important slogan that personal is political, which was a central slogan in the second wave of feminist argument, which refused to believe that you have a two distinct private and public life, okay, which will not allow you to say that, okay, what I live in my private life is matter only concerning to me, and I can have a different engagement in public, okay, or it actually argue out that a person, a woman in particular, the personal life of the person, the personal life of the woman is also deeply political. Okay, her private life, her private choices, her say family life, her life within the gender roles, the kind of relationship that she gets into, each of these things is kind of a deeply political, and that was a very important insight about the kind of the kind of arguments about how even the personal life is deeply political. So this was something very much against the conventional understanding that a person's personal life is different from that person's professional or public or political life. Okay, so that was a kind of a conventional understanding. It also was a product of an increased kind of a critical gaze into one's own personal choices and personal life. So everybody, every scholar, for instance, or every woman, for instance, was motivated to critically look into their own personal life and then try to see how, as women, their choices and life chances are shaped in specific forms. So they were all forced to see the political, the relevance of power, or especially the patriarchal power, in shaping their private and personal life. So there was a call, or there was a argument that women scholars or women need to be politically active, politically conscious even about their own personal choices, about their private life, private sphere, their family life, their sexual relationship, the kind of choices that they make in their own personal life. So this particular argument forced social scientists, especially women social scientists, to come to the understanding that their personal life is very closely connected with the larger structures of patriarchy and larger structures of gender relations. So sociologists and their professional bodies were indicted for being androcentric, and the hegemony of patriarchy in sociology was elucidated. The same point. Yeah. So despite the claim to the value neutrality, sociology, they argued, was a mainstream discipline. Okay, this is an interesting term. It's not a mainstream discipline, it's a mainstream discipline, which had been mainly concerned with the research on men and by implications with theories for men. Okay, this has, and we know that those who have studied classical sociological theory know that we have hardly any important discussion on women by the early classical sociologists. It was always on the margin. Findings based on male samples had been generalized for the whole population, and issues and areas that concerned women were seen as personal and outside the purview of the academic. Even when women were included in the research, they were often presented in a sexist manner. Sex and gender were seldom seen as explanatory variables, and the explanatory theoretical paradigms often naturalized women's subordination on biological grounds. Okay, women thus were hidden from sociological gaze, both theoretically and empirically. Okay, and feminist sociologists were concerned primarily with the underlying sociology as the best sex blind and at worst sexist. It's a very important paragraph that we need to look into that. So despite claim to the value neutrality, sociology, they argued, was a mainstream discipline which had been mainly concerned with research on men and by implications with theories for men. Findings based on all male samples had been generalized for their whole population, and issues and areas that concerned women were seen as personal and outside the purview of the academic. So this was a major trend in sociology, or for that matter any social science, when they refuse to understand and accept women, the gender, as an important category of analysis. Okay, not an object of analysis, not the question of whether you have included women in the sample, but it is much more. Okay, because in the evolution, or in the beginning of these disciplines, the gender was never considered as an explanatory category. Okay, gender was never seen as a category that is capable of expanding your theoretical concerns. Okay, the gender was never seen as a category that was capable of expanding your idea about, say, for example, power, idea about institutions, idea about patriarchy, idea about social organizations. So these understandings simply did not exist. Okay. Even when women are included in the research, they were often presented in a sexist manner. Okay, looking into, as you know, most of the early sociological studies kind of focused on gender roles. Okay, as if these are permanently ascribed, naturally given roles that women do certain kind of work and men do certain kind of work. And there was hardly any attempt to question this assumption that certain roles are by definition feminine, or certain roles are by definition masculine. For example, the earlier studies on kinship and family, or marriage, or a host of other similar kind of institutions did not question this kind of underlying taken for granted assumptions. Sex and gender were seldom seen as explanatory variables, and the explanatory theoretical paradigms often naturalized women's subordination in biological grounds. So this is another one. Sex and gender were seldom seen as explanatory variables. They were never kind of questioned. Okay, they were never questioned. As I mentioned, the gender division of labor, or division of labor based on gender was taken for granted. It was never questioned. It was seen as natural, or it was seen as socially acceptable and therefore non-problematic. And it was seldom seen as explanatory variables, and explanatory theoretical paradigms often naturalized women's subordination on biological grounds. The argument is that women are of an inferior race maybe, or they are by an inferior category because of their physical weakness, and these assumptions were taken for granted and were hardly questioned. Women thus were hidden from sociological gaze, both theoretically and empirically. Okay, it's a very important argument that women were hidden from the sociological gaze. First of all, their issues were not addressed, okay, or they were not seen as a social category that requires special focus or more nuanced theoretical argument. And secondly, so they were absent from the analysis. Secondly, the whole explanatory potential that can be brought out by the category of gender was overlooked. Okay, gender was seen as a category that does not have much of a explanatory potential. And feminist sociologists were concerned primarily with underlying sociology as at best sex blind and at worst sexist. So sex blind in the sense a discipline when it says that we are not concerned about gender, or gender is not our priority, or a gender analysis is not something, is not our main focus, or which believes that we don't see any relevance of gender in this particular area. You say it is gender blind because you think that it simply does not exist. You are blind to the existence of that. Okay, there are arguments about how there are a lot of scholarship that is caste blind. Okay, when we say that Indian society is a modern society where caste doesn't have any place, it is actually it's the inability of the researcher to identify the prevalence of caste out there. It is not it's not that the caste does not exist there, but the caste is not observed, or the researcher simply does not have the ability to observe the more nuanced way in which caste works. So similarly, when you talk about a sex blind researcher, it doesn't mean that sex or gender dynamics simply do not work there, but it is the inability of the researcher to acknowledge and identify and then theorize the more subtle and more nuanced ways in which gender and sex work, and at the worst sexist. Okay, sexism was never problematized then. It was seen as a kind of a very natural kind of argument. This was a period of disenchanting sociology as the entire mainstream came to be declared as mainstream. The absence of women in the cognitive structure of discipline was highlighted. All efforts were directed towards establishing women's experience as significantly different from men and incorporating women's perspectives as theorists and subjects of study. The feminist scholarship since this pioneering critique is often organized into different phases of stages of transforming traditional sociology. Okay, so she now talks about how the conventional sociological theory understands the kind of a transformation of sociology and its later integration of women's studies. The first stage is seen as the one underlying the absence of women in the cognitive structure of the discipline. That's something that we just discussed. The second stage is conceived as focusing on the differential sex roles and gender inequalities in society. The third stage is seen as one moving towards the conceptualization of gender as a social structure, while the fourth stage is seen as one of realization of the intrinsic linkage between gender and other matrices of structural inequalities. So these are the kind of a conventional ways in which the evolution of gender studies into sociology is usually presented. Okay, the first is marked by the mere absence of women in the cognitive structure of the discipline. Women do not constitute a society. By default is a society composed of men. Of course, women are there, but they don't really require any specific kind of attention or analysis. It is taken for granted kind of thing. The second stage is conceived as focusing on the differential sex roles and gender inequalities in society. Okay, it looks into different gender roles, it looks into gender inequality, but it is more kind of taken for granted that this emerges from the different kind of biological features and then more kind of a natural. And the third stage is one moving towards the conceptualization of gender as a social structure. It's more recognition is given. And the fourth stage is seen as one of realization of the intrinsic linkage between gender and other matrices of social inequality. So the fourth one she says is the stage where you look at gender as a very important important part of social structure, and you cannot understand forms of social inequality that exist, say, in religion or in class or in caste without really resorting to an analysis which includes gender as well. Now, she is now kind of a critic of this particular approach. Such this approach at first does not help to varied and vast ranges of feminist writings and scholarship, and also a lot of other issues. Now, moreover, it sidelined the fact that the scholars writing in the same period may, so to say, belong to different phases. More important, the fact that the feminist scholarship has been largely interdisciplinary and marginalized, except in enclaves of women's studies, means that a neat stage-by-stage transformation is next to impossible. Some scholars therefore conceptualize the changes in terms of different intellectual genres rather than cumulative phases of stages. So there are criticisms against this particular approach of looking into the stages. So she's talking about that. Therefore, feminist transformation in the discipline can be more adequately organized into different intellectual genres than into cumulative stages. Besides organizing feminist critique of discipline into different intellectual genres, it is important to categorize the responses of the discipline into these critiques. Now, there have been three broad responses to the feminist critique of the discipline. Okay, feminist critique of the discipline of sociology. One is questions about inclusion, separatism, and reconceptualization. While the first kind of response integrates women into the cognitive structures of the discipline, it leaves the assumption of the mainstream discipline unchallenged. Okay, now the first one, that of course, okay, the society is not only composed of men, you also need to include women in your samples. When you study, say for example, caste, you also need to bring to look into women, or when you study class, you also need to bring in women. When you take a sample, you also need to take a sample of women respondents. So this becomes a kind of a more mechanical introduction of women. Okay, without adequately understanding that the women constitutes a separate gender, and the gender is intrinsically capable of offering more critical perspectives. Okay, is capable of offering more critical pedagogies and critical methodologies. Okay, so this particular realization simply is absent in this first one. Second response, which is a separatist response, argues for sociology of women from a women's standpoint. All women are seen as sharing a common position derived from their marginalization and exploitation in patriarchal society. So the second one is a more vocal response from the feminists who argue that there has to be a sociology of women as a separate domain, or women studies as a separate domain, because women, they say, they share a lot of common features. Now this emerges as a kind of a critique of the mainstream sociology, not only as a critique against the non-inclusion of women, but the realization or the argument that we women, because we share a kind of a common gender, we are distinctly different from that of the men, and there are a lot of things that we share among ourselves, and thereby there has to be a separate sociology of religion. The effort is to conceptualize the social world based on the experience of women. Okay, such a position not only leaves the mainstream unchallenged, but also into a reverse way reiterates the division of women to experience and men to theory. So the second division of women to experience and men to. So the Sharmila argues that the problem with this particular approach of, say, separatism is that it does not really challenge the mainstream sociology. Okay, it says that, okay, you don't understand women as an important category, so we have our own sociology of women, and we will produce our own sociology, because we are different. Now that is why it leaves the mainstream sociology unchallenged, but also a reverse way reiterates the division of women to experience and men to theory, because it says that since our lived experience are different, we constitute differently. In terms of making a difference to the academic too, separatism can only lead to ghettoization of feminist sociological knowledge. In terms of making a difference, yeah. So Sharmila is very convinced that this argument that sociology of women has to have a separate identity and it has to be nurtured differently, will only lead to ghettoization, where different scholars work separately, having not much of a kind of a conversation between them. The third position of reconceptualization seeks to move beyond filling in gaps and separatist knowledge. It seeks to integrate feminist challenge to the discipline in ways that leads to a reconceptualization of sociological categories. From such a position, then the project is not one of mere inclusion of women, but of challenging some of the taken for granted dichotomies like public versus private or domestic versus paid work. Okay. Now this is the most maybe revolutionary or maybe the most promising possibility that many of the scholars are actually asking for. So they would argue that the category of gender is a very potent explanatory category. Okay, it can problematize, it can ask a lot of important questions. Okay, many times subversive questions about the taken for granted categories and theoretical assumptions within sociology, and this will benefit, and it will help every sociologist. Okay, any sociologist who is working in any field, whether somebody is working in the field of racism or religion or institutions of bureaucracy or power or poverty or casteism, in each of these categories, in each of these specializations, the category of gender has the ability to complicate the taken for granted assumptions and then render it more richer and more theoretically vibrant. So from such a position, then the project is not one of mere inclusion of women, but of challenging some of the taken for granted dichotomies like private versus public or domestic versus paid work. Okay, so now for example, if you look into some of the important theoretical theoretical arguments from feminist scholarship about the domestic work and then paid work, usually women's work at home was never recognized. Okay, women's work was never recognized. It was, first of all, it was never paid. There is no remuneration associated with a housewife or our mothers or wives who do not go out for a paid work. But it was seen as not even as a work. Okay, it was not even categorized as a work. But now recent scholarship has argued that if it were to be monetized, if it were to be evaluated on the basis of actual remuneration, then it's a huge amount, the huge amount of work that is rendered by these women. So when you talk about care work, the way in which women take care of the elderly people, or the kind of emotional labor that is involved in it. So this feminist framework has really able to complicate many of these taken for granted dichotomies between domestic and paid work, or between public and private. Okay, what constitutes private, what constitutes public, and as criticized as if these were kind of watertight compartments. Each of these positions may be seen as employing the different strategies of feminist theory. The first position of inclusion proposes to move towards a non-sexist sociology through the inclusion of women. The second proposes a strategy of reversal, the reworking of sociological knowledge from the standpoint of women, thereby moving towards particularly of women's sociology. The third position of reconceptualization often operates through a strategy of displacement so that the deconstructive technique may be employed to challenge accepted meanings. That's exactly the same thing that we discussed. Nevertheless, displacement alone may not be an adequate basis for reconceptualization, which is an ongoing and uphill struggle. So, Sharmila argues that this deconstruction of existing categories will not be sufficient, but the gender studies or feminist studies must be able to construct or able to positively contribute better, more nuanced and more sensitive categories and theoretical frames. The last 2 decades or more, the central category women in feminist theorization has come to be challenged as a homogenized notion. Trends in postmodern feminism have assumed a nominalist position and have challenged the use of the category of women as essentialist. And again, you know that the recent, say, scholarship in women's studies, especially maybe last 4 decades, from 1980s onwards, there have been increasing scholarship that challenge this idea that all women, because they are women, experience similar kind of issues from patriarchal system, or this whole idea about a universal sisterhood. Okay? Every women in the world suffer similarly. They share the similar kind of life, and they are similar. Okay, so that argument has been criticized very heavily from at least for the last three or four decades. We have had black feminism. We have had feminism from the third world, by Dalit feminism, and we have had Muslim feminism, Islamic feminism. So each of these categories really complicated this argument that all women are same, or all women constitute a singular category. Several trends in black and third world feminism, starting with Chandra Mohanty's essay and a lot of other work in this field. The postmodernists argue that feminist goals could not be conceptualized in terms of the needs and interests of the white middle class women. Black feminist sociologists like P.H. Collins underline the ways in which different epistemologies promote the interest of different groups and how oppositional knowledge is subtly suppressed. So the major critique that emerged was that the kind of a feminist knowledge that was produced in the West was the knowledge by and about the liberal white woman. Okay, that was theorized as the feminism of women across the world, okay, which is not true. So that is why there is a huge criticism against the Western liberal, especially liberal feminism, saying that these feminism really represent the white women, middle class white women of the West, and not that of the brown women, not that of the women in the third world, not that of the black women, not that of the Muslim women, not that of the Dalit women. So that kind of criticism began to emerge seriously. So that is a kind of an introductory section that she talks about. Now, I think I will take a pause here. We'll conclude this session, and then we will complete this remaining section in the coming class. Okay, because I don't think it is possible to complete this essay within one session. We will go a bit slow, and because it's an important and interesting essay, we will complete this essay in the coming class. Thank you.